for joining me. I met Olabimpe over the summer digitally, so we've never actually talked in person, but thanks for being willing to talk about the Sagittarius decans. Um,
Thank you for having me.
yeah. Do you want to share what your qualifications are? Do you want that to remain a mystery or have it
Oh,
unfold as we talk about the cards?
I'll share. Yes. I
Okay,
have Mercury in Sagittarius 1, and then I have Venus conjunct the North Node in Sagittarius 3.
awesome. Cool. All right, so I will share the screen. And for those that have kind of listened to the other Decan videos, the concept of the series is basically just to talk to other astrologers and uh, tarot readers and, you know, other magical people just about the decans of astrology. So the decans are the 10-degree increments that break up a single sign into three. So there's 12 signs, 10 degrees per sign, it's 360, and it goes through there's tarot associations for each. No, in tarot, the Wheel of Fortune card represents Jupiter, and the Temperance card represents Sagittarius. And so these are kind of like the premier major arcana cards that inform the decans. So we'll talk more about Temperance than we will about the Wheel. But really, just to start us off, do you want to give? You said that Temperance is one of your favorite cards. Do you want to talk a little bit about that before we jump into the decans?
Yeah, absolutely. I think Temperance is a really interesting card for me because I saw the first time I saw it, obviously the first thing that struck me was the calm on the face
Mm,
while the liquid is being poured. And it seems like this kind of action that couldn't exist in nature the way it's being poured
mm-hmm.
until I saw, I think they call it like a chaiwala, someone who serves chai, like street food.
Yeah.
And the way they pour to aerate the chai to make it cool enough to drink, kind of looks exactly like this. And it looks like they're
Wow.
defying gravity and it's such a very clear motion of like pulling apart, but like kind of working together. And it's an understanding of all of the moving parts and how they might flow together. It's such a focused action that you can't really do it unless you understand like what the goal is. But
Yeah.
that's what like strikes me every time I see it is like this motion, this like capture of a person in motion of like a really specific action.
That's beautiful. I'm gonna look that up because
Yeah.
to make it's a blending of all those ingredients too, which is kind of what temperance is. Temperance took me a long time to kind of get. I was like, what's the deal? Like, is it? But understanding that some people call this card art. It's like
Mhm.
the blending and the synthesis of ingredients to make a secret third thing. I was
Mhm.
like, okay, that makes sense. With the
Mhm.
way you were describing the chai is like I think it's in Portugal and Spain. They have these kava bongs, is what they call them, and it looks like a glass water pitcher, and you put this real dry white wine in it, and then you pour it from very far away,
Mhm.
and it kind of like arcs over, and like the way
Yeah.
you drink it is to like pour it. And so it's like you can't just sip it out of a glass. It's about the aeration. The aeration kind of gives it the verve or the life in the drink, and it doesn't happen if it's just in a still glass. It needs that action, um, which is appropriate if we want to look at the first decan is about like swiftness and action, and we enter in with the Eight of Wands. But before I get ahead of myself, would you help me just describe the Temperance card? I mean, you described kind of the look on the face,
Yes.
but what else kind of jumps out at you?
Yes, the great like wings off of this main character.
Yeah.
The upright triangle, you can tell there's like on the chest of the character, you can tell there's even though the face is calm, that there's this understanding of action and energy.
Yeah.
There's kind of a solar halo effect around the head of this character, and then they've got one of their feet in the water and one on the ground. There's this understanding of being in different states at one time.
Mm-hmm.
And then looking into the background of the card, you can see a trail that goes off into the mountains with the
Yeah.
sun rising over that.
Yeah, I like that at the center of the forehead of the character, there's this like solar, almost like this third eye of like
Hmm.
this illumination point, and then there's a rising or setting sun, or just a glowing orb in the background, and like at the end of that path, kind of just signaling enlightenment. And I do like how the feet are 1 foot in the water, 1 foot on ground, similar to the star card, which also has kind of that flowing water. It is like two states, or the blending of two states, to have that secret third thing.
Mm-hmm.
Um, yeah, and the rest of the card, there's some yellow lilies, and hidden in some grass. And then there's that path. There's some mountains in the background, but it's primarily the figure wearing just, like white neutral robes, and it's androgynous. It's not necessarily particularly female or male. And then it has these beautiful, gorgeous, very lush red wings that are real fiery, and the triangle on the chest also kind of signals like this fire, this inner fire. And then these holding two golden goblets that have this seemingly impossible connection of the currency of the water between the two. So making himself a cup of chai. So Temperance is the Sagittarius card. And then the decan ruler of this one is Mercury, which Mercury is not at home in Sagittarius. And I'm always a fan of an exiled planet. Being a native that has a couple of these, like I appreciate the resourcefulness and the adventure and the misadventure and just the creativity that comes with having a planet in exile. Um, I personally really like Sagittarius Mercury. I think that it's a funny placement. I think it's probably the signature of the comedian is a Mercury Sag. But just as a decan ruler for these first 10 degrees, how do you see on the Magician card in Tarot and Mercury kind of playing with this land of Sagittarius?
Yeah, I mean, Sagittarius 1 is associated with so many different archetypes that are action oriented. I think a
Mm-hmm.
lot about the fixed star Antares that's in
Mm-hmm.
Sagittarius 1, that like idea of the kind of ferocity and detail-oriented nature that's necessary for the military,
Mm.
for defending and offending, like
Yeah.
for these like bold and brash tasks. And I think Mercury's role here is that strategy and is that like ability to plan, whereas Jupiter does the action, right?
Yeah.
So when they work in concert, they can often be at odds, but when they work in concert, it's just this ability to strategize in an instant and keep going. And if
Mm.
there's even a slight change of wind, the ability to like change the strategy and keep going,
Yeah.
right?
Adapt. Yeah.
Hmm.
Yeah, I mean, one thing that, I think of just like in general, if we have Jupiter rules is the domicile ruler of Sagittarius. And so it's like the temple of Jupiter is Sagittarius. And when you have these visiting dignitaries, the visiting planet has something to offer the sign. And even though it's very far away from its home place, I mean, Jupiter and Pisces are ruled by Sagittarius and Pisces are ruled by Jupiter, and the opposing sign is also ruled by Mercury. So there's like this mutual assured destruction between the two. Like they have some sort of tension between each other, but there's also this sense of familiarity. And just the cards themselves, I mean, the magician has all of the elements on his table to be able to use at will, to adapt, to kind of change. And I just feel like that action alone of being capable of transmuting the energy by holding that double terminated wand through his own body and pointing it down to the ground, like he himself is similar to that same watery channel between the two cups. Like I just feel like on paper they might seem at odds, but they have so much capacity to be totally in concert, like you said, like totally aligned with each other, to be able to make swift action. And that's what the Eight of Wands is. It's called the Lord of Swiftness. Susan Chang makes, she's a tarot artist, and she makes luggage tags that have this card on it to attach to your luggage so that it can get to your home faster, so it doesn't
Oh, I
get
need one.
lost. Yeah. Yeah. Um, so yeah, the Eight of Wands card itself it's simply just like a daytime card. There's a blue background. There's a little bit of kind of, mundane hills in the background. And then there's just eight wands with little sprigs of life coming out of it, all pointing the same direction. To me, this card just says like onward, like just go through, onward. I like this card. My lot of spirit is in this decan. And so
Mm,
I own this one. It's my only little placement of Sagittarius, but I love it. It's my secret little mini sun, and love that it kind of transmutes that quick silverness of the magician, forward into whatever battles or adventures that it might be. But the card itself is pretty plain. It doesn't have time for adornment because it's all about the movement itself.
right. I really love how simple and clear this card is, especially whenever it comes up.
Yeah.
There's just the forward motion, and even though it's not like a weapon,
Mm.
the wands aren't always seen as a weapon, but they
Yeah.
can be in a lot of cards, right?
Yeah.
Unlike the swords where we kind of think by default they're a weapon, but
Right.
the
Right.
wands can kind of be used in different ways, but this one is clearly a weapon, but also a trajectory, right? We're
Mm. Hmm.
seeing almost like not a strike of a match, but by the time you check back, something's already in motion, right? Like
Right.
if you don't look quick enough, you might miss it. Like that's kind of the
Yeah.
energy of like just the capacity to follow a trajectory. And this is definitely like in motion. You don't have an idea of where it's going to end, but you know exactly where it came from, and that
Right.
there's force and almost intimidation behind it, right? Like
There's
you
eight of
need to
them.
get on. Yeah, you need to get on this, right?
Yeah.
Like this is, yeah.
Yeah, like the motion, like so you can't see the left side of the card of where they start. So they've already started. That's kind of it's like it's already begun,
Mhm.
and then they're all kind of pointing slightly down. So it's like the sense of gravity. I'm reminded of like the phrase of like parking downhill, like getting yourself set up so that when you wake up the next morning, you can just like turn on the
Mm,
car and go. It's like the
yeah.
momentum has already kind of started. But yeah, like the five of wands is like, clearly like there's some sort of commotion going on and they're all kind of tangled up with each other and they haven't decided who's the victor yet. But
Hmm.
the eight is like they're all together. They're like moving
Consensus,
together.
right?
There's consensus and that sense of the momentum because they're all kind of pointing towards their next victim or the direction they're going or whatever. But it does have, yeah, it's a nice little simple card. So your own Mercury placement is here.
Yes, yes. And I was looking at Austin Coppock's description of the decans and the
Mm-hmm.
placements in the decans, and he describes Mercury here as infectious optimism. And I think there's just something really profound to me about like Mercury's ability to um, kind of pick up all of the pieces, and
Mm-hmm.
willingness to do so is given by Jupiter, right? There's this
Yeah.
idea of like when we are willing to convince everyone around us and get everyone on the same page,
Mm-hmm.
we're able to be more effective and more quick, right?
Huh.
And it's that desire to do that part first that
Yeah.
makes every operation more efficient.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a great way. I mean, like currently we have, Mercury and Sagittarius and its ruling planet Jupiter and Gemini. And so there is this like opposition between the two. And like what something you said about Mercury is like all the little pieces. And that's kind of what differentiates Mercury from Jupiter in a real basic sense is Jupiter tries to gather together and like have this, consensus for the people. And Mercury is about like breaking it all apart, but they're both trying to understand and find some sort of cohesion. So I think it's a nice marriage between the two. Um, Infectious optimism. That
It
would
was
be
actually infectious opinions, but I
opinion.
think
I like
that's
infectious optimism.
that's me being the Sag Mercury. It doesn't matter if it's accurate. Just just be
Yeah,
convincing.
well, and it's like maybe it should be because like what's the point of having an infectious opinion? You're trying to get people to share it, right? You don't
Right.
you're
Right.
trying to infect other people so that there is consensus and
Hmm.
maybe you hope that they'll come to you if your
Right.
idea is good enough.
Hmm.
Um, my husband has his Mercury in this decan too, and something that he says that I'm just reminded of is like, especially in the very current time of like being worried about just the state of the world and not going down these dark thought paths because like you can use your imagination for anything, you might as well use them for good. like hope for the best and not just imagine the worst, because
Right.
imagining the worst is actually pretty easy. It's
Hmm.
harder to think about what could happen in a
Yeah.
hopeful sense. So I like infectious optimism just
Oh,
because
that's
of
a good point. I do think there's this, and it can go either way. It can be positive or negative, but this idea that if you have a clear vision
that.
of the future, and clear vision itself might be like a descriptive term, like the clarity of Mercury and the vision of Jupiter.
Mm-hmm.
If you have a very clear vision, you don't have to question every step. You
Mm,
just adjust, right? If you just
yeah,
believe in the end point, you don't really have to hesitate. But if you lack that belief, then you're going to have a really difficult time. And if you lack
that's
that
true.
clarity, it doesn't matter how much belief you have.
Yeah, yeah, that's beautiful. Um, Anything more about the second before we move on? I feel like the Lord of Swiftness, we kind of have gone through.
Yeah, I think we got it.
Yeah, yeah. Thanks, Mercury. And then we go to the Lord of Strength. So this is the middle decan. It's the 10 degrees in the very smack middle of Sagittarius. It's all those wands now are kind of planted in a sense. The character in the card is a little wounded. He has a bandage around his head, but he's upright. It's not like the other cards where you're really worried about the well-being of the character. He's got one wand in his hand, and the other 8 wands are behind him. This decan is ruled by the moon, and again, we still have the Temperance card. So we can talk about the moon in a second, but would you just kind of give your ideas of the Lord of Strength just as like the name for this one? I don't quite get. So
Mm.
what's your vibe, or how would you describe this card and this card's strength itself for Sag
Yeah.
2?
Yeah, I think for the card itself, I think this kind of look of the character off to the side with the bandage and the wand in hand, you can see there's still some level of agency, but
Mm,
this is the middle part of the race of the action. This is, you've gotten the initial burst out and you're nowhere near the end, and you have to kind of make sure that you have the stamina
yeah, I was
inside
thinking of that word.
internally to like make it to the end. And I think having the moon rule this decan makes a lot of sense because there's a lot of tending to your body that you have to do in order to maintain the kind of stamina that Sagittarius too is like demanding, right?
Yeah.
And it is a demand. There's no, I mean, even like in seasons, right? Like this is the time of year when like we've accepted that things are dying, we're getting ready for winter, right? Like
Yeah.
you have to keep going. You can't stop. You need to stow things away before everything is too dead for you to function.
Yeah.
So I do think this is like, okay, there's a little bit of exhaustion here, but the idea of the second is like, though there is discomfort, you need to be managing that as dedicatedly as you plan for the future, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, if just thinking of, so is the High Priestess card represents the moon in tarot, and just thinking about the moon herself kind of can symbolize many things, but just looking at like circumstances, like how the moon changes just like we do. The moon changes face and changes position in the sky and moves around and kind of has the serpentine nature, and so do our circumstances. They change from day to day. This is ruled by Jupiter, which is the wheel of fortune, also has kind of that that changing of circumstance. And having the stamina, I think, is a really great word for this. Having the stamina and the strength to stay in the race or stay with the momentum that those wands have. I mean, maybe those 8 wands like raced to meet this one guy that was here waiting, and like, all right, now we got to strategize and see how we adapt and adjust and be our mutable selves for this next change in circumstance. I mean, the High Priestess card, as just like one of the most magical cards ever on earth. I love the High Priestess card so much, and there's so much about it that is just, to me, just purely magic. But on a functional level, I think the moon can help us interpret the rest of the sky, and being kind of like an aid, like a functional benefic in this sense, even though it doesn't, it's not at home here. It's not exiled or fallen or exalted. Like nothing is in Sagittarius except Jupiter. Like Jupiter takes up all the space. They don't need any more other planets in there.
Yeah.
But just like for the functional circumstance, but then also beyond that veil, the moon is also here to kind of be that magical planet that temperance, being in two worlds at once with those feet, and then also Jupiter having that vision beyond, what's beyond us. I think that there's it's not duplicity, it's there's just many layers to this decan that I think is why it kind of I was kind of stuck with it. I was like, but the middle of Sag is not just endurance. It's not just
Mm,
strength,
yeah.
there's more to it. And so
Hmm.
also spiritual practice is work, like
Yes.
it's not easy. You can't rest on your laurels or you're not really actually doing the work. And
Yeah.
so I think that's what I wanted to see is like more clearly esoteric imagery in the card.
Yeah.
But it's not always on the table, Sometimes it's behind the veil.
You know what? Now that you said that, I'm thinking of, so I took Lindsay Mack's tarot class, Tarot for the Wild Soul, I think it's
Mm,
called, and thinking of the Wheel of Fortune and just how circumstances change, something she said was, you kind of have the choice on whether the wheel on the outside or on the inside. And on the
yeah.
inside, there's less turbulence, right?
Yeah.
And the outside is like where you get on and off, right? So
Right.
there may be this point where you don't have the energy to be on the outside and you need to make the decision to move in, right?
Huh.
There's this a little bit of surrendering to a turbulence that you cannot completely control, though you
Right.
have your own individual agency.
Yeah.
And I love that interplay with the moon and even this, a Nine of Wands card, like you're looking off somewhere, there's an assessment happening, right? The
Mm-hmm.
assessment isn't just internal. And I think that's with the High Priestess as well, that calm comes from a surrender to the moon, to circumstance, to what's happening,
Yeah.
and then wielding whatever can be wielded in that moment.
Mm-hmm. And just thinking about the time of year, at least in the northern hemisphere, like it's like we're still descending into the darkest time of the year. And so like you said, like things are dying. There's kind of little harvest to still gather. The leaves are down, the berries have dried. So, there's not a lot of things to pack away. And so then you have to maybe look at what you have gathered or what you have access to, and yeah, decide, do I need to crawl inside the wheel? I love that idea. um, or do I have enough strength to stay on and maybe take a chance of what other circumstances might happen externally? But yeah,
Mhm.
there an assessment to kind of see, to check to see, do I have what it takes to keep going? Because we still have a little bit more time. It's not dawn yet, you know.
Mhm. Definitely.
Yeah. Any more to say just about this card? I mean, again, it's similar as in not much going on. There's 8 wands that are
Mhm.
either planted or just leaning up against the flooring that the character is standing on, kind of all standing upright behind him, and he has one in his hand. The similarities that I see in this card in the High Priestess is there's a gap behind him of in between the wands where he's kind of guarding, and similar to how she's kind of guarding that threshold, and maybe he's protecting something, or maybe he's just come through that threshold. Any sort of opening like that always kind of gets my attention. But anything else that jumps out to you?
No, I think that really covers it.
Oh. He also has his sleeves rolled up, like he's already done a lot of work.
Yeah, he's looking tired, but
Yeah.
like still in that assessment mode. It's almost like trying to gauge and understand how much toll is going to be exacted during
Yeah.
this whole process.
Yeah.
And kind of measuring both internally and externally. How much more do I have to give? How much
Mm,
more do I have to give, right? Like,
yeah.
is this necessary?
Yeah. I saw this meme yesterday. It was like, I'm not a morning bird or a night owl. I'm like this like nervous, exhausted pigeon during the day. And that's what this card reminds me of.
A New York City
It's
pigeon.
like I kind of feel that. I sent it to my sister and she was like, they're really just doves. And I was like, yeah, like optimistic, like overweight doves. Like pigeons and doves are like, they're close, but like their attitudes are very, very different.
Right, right, right.
Um, all right, so then we get to the third decan of Sagittarius. This is the end of the story of fire in Tarot, right? So we don't see it again until we get back to Aries 1 with the Two of Wands. And so this is quite the burdensome card. It's ruled by Saturn, and I really like the changeover between the last 10 degrees of Sagittarius and the first 10 degrees of
Oh
Capricorn,
yes.
because
Hmm.
Jupiter rules Sagittarius, but the decan of this last 10 degrees is Saturn. And then
Hmm.
Saturn rules all of Capricorn, but the first 10 degrees are Jupiter. And so there's the sense of Antitia, there's shared light between the last 10 degrees and the first 10 degrees of Sagittarius and Capricorn, respectively. And then they have this mutual reception of rulership. Um, and it really is about the story of like finally coming back, and then that hopeful Jupiter. I mean, it kind of seems cruel whenever like Saturn comes in and rains on the jovial parade every
Yeah.
time, like, but it's also necessary. Otherwise, we would just grow like a Cancer without any limitation. So I know Saturn has its appropriate place, but yeah, the floor is yours because you have a placement here,
Yeah.
and it's kind of the end of the story. So what do you see with
Yeah.
these?
Honestly, I'm glad you brought up the Antisha because that Venus North Node conjunction I mentioned I have in this decan is Antisha my ascendant, like to the
Oh,
degree.
wow.
So this is like
Beautiful. Yeah.
100% like that span is 100% me. I think this like 10 of Wands exhaustion of carrying all of them together, you're pushing, it's the character is pushing all of the wands or carrying them all, still going to the end. This is the finish line, right?
Yeah.
Um, and I love this paired with the World card, which, although it's Saturn, looks way more optimistic than we think of Saturn, as
Yeah.
it's like this character, almost like right or going through a laurel.
Mm.
And there's a sense of earning the rest that you're about to take.
Mm.
In the first decan of Capricorn. Um, the kind of push here is 100% willpower. It's like you don't have
Yeah.
anything left, but you push through anyway. And the other thing is that this is also where a lot of people quit things,
Mm.
right? And decide, like, oh, this is actually too much, or it's, oh, this is not worth it. And I
Mm-hmm.
think there's this Saturnian assessment of, like, okay, we're here, we've exhausted ourselves. Is this where we need to go actually? And I think
Yeah.
some of the reason that's important is because coming up we have this Mercury retrograde kind of
Yeah.
taking us right over this path. It's going to station right as soon as it gets into this final decan and then go back to the first one. And so I think there's going to be this element of like reassessment of like, okay, we had a path that we chose, we found it difficult, we kept going, and then towards the end we're assessing like, was this the right decision?
Yeah.
And it's like we'll get another chance to make that assessment. Maybe we'll end up in the same spot, but maybe we'll be in a completely different direction.
Mm-hmm.
But a lot of that decision making happens here.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I kind of chuckled because it's like, Saturn is about the limitation, like shows you the limit, and does feel like reaching the limit. And it's, in a way, I want Saturn to be like, ding, 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 you met your limitation. Like, congratulations. Now
Yeah,
get back to it. This character is holding 10 bound wands, like in a really awkward way. Like there's an easier
yeah,
way to carry that for sure. It's almost
absolutely.
like if you're the type of person that tries to get all of their bags of groceries out of the car and bring them in the house without doing it one time,
Drag
even
me.
though it would take you less time probably to do a couple trips, there's this like, I'm just gonna be a pack mule from my driveway
Hmm.
to my house. And it's like you're holding it in really awkward ways. You can't carry that for very long. And
Hmm.
so the limit of I've collected all this work or all this responsibility or all of this karmic weight, and you always have the choice to just set it down. And I think that you're spot on with the Mercury retrograde. Is we're given the chance, we peek into this and be like, this is how much you have going on, or this is what you're carrying in the Sagittarius house of your chart. Now set it down and go back and do it again and see if you would take the same route. Would you,
Yeah.
the Ivan Osokin, like, are you going to do it again the same way, or are you going to choose a different path?
Hmm.
Because we do need to, Saturn shows us the limit. and fire, like gives us the fuel to, to reach those limits. But we always have that choice.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I will say, like, the victories that I've had that are associated with this Decan have been deeply satisfying, but
Mm.
so deeply costly, right?
Yeah.
There's no way to achieve victory in this state without like giving a lot. So there's a lot of sacrifice here.
Yeah.
And that's why you have to make the assessment, is because you won't be whole at the end. You have to go and recuperate. There's no continuing after a victory in this decade,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah, because the next card is a two of coins. It's like, let's start over.
So it
Yeah.
really has to be worth it, and that's kind of why you make the assessment. Because if you do it and it's not, you're still
Yeah.
stuck.
Yeah. So do you find that successes after this amount of work are longer lasting because they're Saturnian, or they're just worth it? And maybe that remembering them longer is a way of longer lasting, but do you find them to be more permanent?
I don't know if I feel like it's more permanent. I think it's more indicative of like genuine desire.
Hmm.
Obviously, Venus is there for me, so maybe that's part of why
Right.
the desire comes in. But like, it's more indicative of something genuine because no one would do that
Right.
unless like no
Yeah.
one would go that far unless
Yeah.
it was deeply critically important to them
Yeah.
because it is such a challenge. Like, but that's why it's so satisfying, right?
Yeah.
Like when you remember a challenge that you've overcome, you actually prepare yourself for future challenges and, you know, give yourself some hope for future challenges, right?
Yeah.
But if
Yeah.
you've never attacked something very difficult and very important to you, you'll always have that kind of trepidation. So here is where you kind of like, okay, this is where I make the decision and I go for it because I need to know what I'm made of.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, capacity is the word, like showing
Hmm.
yourself that you have the capacity. Like you said
Right.
something about it's like just it's will at this point. And what
Hmm.
came for me is like it's muscle memory, it's like
Yes.
you don't even know why you're doing it. You just don't want to quit while you're
Hmm.
almost there. And
Yeah.
doing something big, even if like the project itself or the campaign or the relationship or whatever success comes through this deck and for an individual, even
Hmm.
if that in itself like is complete and then you just move on from it, telling yourself that you have the capacity to do big things, I think is a great
Right.
lesson for it. And it creates that muscle memory. And it reminds me of lucid dreaming or just doing
Mm,
any sort of dream practice. Like
yeah.
people have these dreams of like they're in a really scary situation and then they wake up and they're like, why did I have a dream, that I was like being rescued out of a helicopter, blah blah blah. Like I don't
Yeah.
have that memory. Is that a past life? What is that? And a lot of times I just feel like your dream is just showing you these options of ways that you're capable of like being the hero in a story
Right.
or slaying the dragon or you have a dream that you're in school again and you have to take this test and you haven't studied and you wake up and you're like, I haven't been in school in 20 years.
Yeah.
Why did I have that dream? And it's like it's showing you have the capacity to meet things, and the dream
Yeah.
itself like shows you can do big things. And if you read stories like that or you have dreams like that those little bits kind of signal that you can carry bigger loads, and as like
Yeah.
ways of inspiration, because I love fire just for that optimism.
Hmm.
Even the Leo ones that are like the more difficult,
Listen.
they're so like that to me. It's like optimism and potential and inspiration and opportunity. Like the whole, all of the fire, and tarot especially is just like so like go get them,
Hmm.
and this is that we're getting it. Just push through so you can get through, that awkward bundle that you're carrying.
Right. I mean, I'm glad you brought up Leo because I'm thinking of that Leo 3 trine to Sagittarius 3. Obviously,
Oh yeah.
so I have a lot of spirit in Leo 3,
Oh
like
cool.
exactly trine this. So it's relevant that way, but there's this energy at the end of Leo of like you are not strategizing for anything, right? You're just working on heart and you are down. You're
Yeah.
down and out and you're still going, right?
Yeah.
It's what seen in Lord of the Rings with the guy who gets stabbed like 12 times and keeps going out. and keeps
Yeah.
going after each like stab. It's that energy, and I think pairing that with Sat or comparing that, um, Jupiter's influence here is like you've studied so hard for this
Mm.
moment.
Hmm.
And if you don't allow yourself to truly flex and see how much that training has gotten you, not just when the conditions are perfect, but when the conditions are, dwindling, right?
Yeah.
Maybe they're
Yeah.
perfect at the beginning, you had a lot of energy and action, and then, as all tasks, as all races, as all battles, it gets really hard towards the end. It's like,
Yeah. Your resources start to deplete. Yeah.
and that's when you understand the value of your training, right?
Hmm.
You can do it with just heart, but there's an element of Sagittarius that said, "Oh, we have prepared for this."
Mm-hmm.
Um, so the only way you're going to know if that preparation is worth anything is
Yeah.
by committing to it.
And maybe that is like the the blessing of, in 2024 the Mercury retrogrades were primarily in fire signs,
Mm.
and Mercury is spending more time in Sagittarius than any of them, which again seemed really funny, seemed like the biggest joke. So like
Yeah.
the chance that we get for Mercury to go through and really let us, Mercury's going to go through and like again break it into smaller pieces. Whatever the Sagittarius house is for you, it's going to go in and like defragment your computer, your spirit computer, and then it's going to help put it back together in ways. And so if you're working on something, anything, and you at the beginning of the retrograde, um, it starts to kind of like run into roadblocks or come up with some sort of like, it just keeps getting hung up on something or it falls off completely, like that is a blessing, because maybe you would not have had the stamina to keep it going until the solstice. Like you get to go and like get new resources or drop some of those wands. You don't have to carry all of it. I think that's part of this that it reminds me of like sometimes you realize you're holding on to a lot of stuff that maybe if you looked at it closely, you would just set it down.
Hmm.
But it's just because you're already carrying it and it would disrupt the awkward balance of those wands to begin with. There's not a lot of discerning of what you're carrying. You're just
Yeah.
pushing it through.
Yeah, and I think that's why like Mercury struggles more here than in the first decans. It's
Mm,
like the there's not a whole lot of willingness to stop and reassess.
yeah.
There's only the goal in mind, right?
Yeah.
All of the strategy, all of the detail-oriented like, perfect conditions have kind of withered away.
Yeah.
And it's really really difficult when you're already feeling exhausted to delay any further. And I think
We do not have time for this.
the lesson this year in so many ways, but definitely during this retrograde is going to be like, and sorry, but you must.
Yeah.
Like we know it's not pleasant. Just
Yeah.
the
The
sooner you do
timing
it, the
seems
sooner it happens.
wrong. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. Can you just speak a little bit about the world card?
Yes.
Because the world card and the wheel remind me of each other. They have some similar like
Hmm.
little imagery, but just like
Yes.
what's the world card to you?
Yeah, so we have this like laurel that's encircling the whole card and the character in the center. And the character in the center has like a ribbon flowing over them, and the two batons similar to the magician's baton, but
Mm,
held like at a relaxed place. And this character in the center is going through the laurel, and then in each of the four corners we have a representation of the fixed signs. So we have a lion for Leo, a bull for Taurus, an eagle for Scorpio, I think that is, and
mm-hmm.
then Aquarius is a person
Yeah.
in kind of a cloud. And it's just this representation of almost like a mastery, like being
Mm,
given a reward for mastery of a
yeah.
certain topic or condition or phase. Um, it is the end of the tarot, so you're like at a place where like you whatever you can enjoy in this moment, enjoy it because you're about to be shunted back to this like
Back to the
this
fool.
right the space of like okay surrender because now you're on another path you don't know anything, but I really like it as a representation of Saturn, again not being like super negative but like really underscoring like the fixedness of a victory that's won by strategy, that's
Hmm.
won by learning, that's won by time, right? This is not the kind of victory that a novice can have.
Yeah.
A novice can have like kind of an oopsie victory or like, a
Yeah.
valor victory, but this is like a very intentional victory.
Yeah.
Um, and I like that about this card.
Yeah, you used the word mastery, and it struck me of this card and the Fool card. So both characters are kind of just like stepping out, and one is like
Hmm.
stepping out, not looking at the ground, and not paying attention to the dog barking at their feet, and really
Hmm.
just like ignorance is bliss. You know,
Right.
leap and the net will appear, sort of a thing.
Hmm.
But there's a certain kind of grace with this character's card that does come from mastery, and I think just about like athletes that have
Mm.
trained their bodies so that they can just like it looks like they're swimming or flying,
Hmm.
across like the soccer field or the basketball court or gymnast or swimmers. It's like they have spent so much time crafting their athletic ability that it looks so easy and it's so
Yes.
graceful.
It is
And but
giving
you
Olympian. Yeah.
yeah, but you only get that from a lifetime of hard work, and that's kind of what Saturn demands. It's like Saturn has the boundary, but Saturn also just the requirement for Saturn is that mastery, and
Hmm.
and yeah, I think that's a really beautiful way of this is what you get. It's a more long lasting gift from Saturn, and have that ease and that grace of going through, because that this character is also not necessarily looking at the ground, but
Yeah.
you have more confidence of like you still probably know where you're going.
Yeah. This is like Simone Biles dismounting, right?
Yeah,
Like this is this is very much like I've done this more times than anyone else would,
yeah,
right?
yeah,
This is like the conferring of a degree. This is like very much a space of, if only people knew what it took to get here,
yeah,
kind of
yeah.
smirk on the face, right?
Yeah, this is Simone Biles, and the Fool is that Australian breakdancer. It was like, what? What are you doing?
Oh, what a time we're in. That was incredible.
That was. I actually could not get enough of that. I was like, that is
I
bold.
watched it so many times.
I did too. Um, okay, and then with that, like we've kind of gone through Sagittarius. I'm going to go back just to this first card or this first slide here because we talked a
Mhm.
little bit about the wheel. This is just a stamp of it. It's not the actual
Mhm.
card. Um, can you just speak a little bit just about Sagittarius and talk a little bit about Jupiter, like how you feel Jupiter is represented through the sign of Sagittarius, and to help close us out?
Yeah, I think Jupiter goes back to the glyph, which is on the wheel, right? It's this arrow. Um, there is a goal. There's always a goal. There's always a broader context that Jupiter is kind of bestowing in this Sagittarian sense, and Sagittarius wants to pursue the goal. It's not
Yeah,
just recognizing the goal or appreciating it, it's seeing how we could all be closer to it and taking that action.
yeah,
And I think that is one of the beautiful things about Sagittarius that differentiates it from like further out Pisces of like just noticing and accepting. Sagittarius is like, well, I see where we could go and I don't think we've gone far enough, so
yeah,
let's do it, right? Like
yeah,
there's this ultimate energy to attain something higher with all of the knowledge and information that we're collecting, right? There has to be a purpose. I think everyone with heavy Sagittarius placements is very, very purpose driven, right? If
mm,
there's no purpose, we would be doing
right,
something
yeah,
else, right? Yeah.
yeah,
Why? I cannot be convinced to put in all of the effort and endure all of the difficulty that will come with attaining like growth or a goal unless there's like a deeper purpose behind it. So I
yeah,
think Jupiter is bestowing that purpose, and that's also why it's like such a spiritual place to be in. I think a lot of times when we think of Jupiterian spirituality, we're not always thinking of Sagittarius. Like a lot of times we're thinking of Pisces.
hmm,
And there's this impression of spirituality as like this kind of aloof and, kind of go with the flow, but I really like kind of putting it in the Sagittarian context of like, if something is wrong, you must fix it, right?
Yeah.
And this deep conviction that cannot be shaken. And I think that's just super relevant for like socio-political times we're living in, just to
Mm-hmm.
like, okay, if you see something wrong,
Act.
where in
Yeah.
you are you finding the amount of purpose where you're like, okay, and therefore we're not going to live this way,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
That's what Jupiter kind of teaches us through Sagittarius, I think.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, they both Pisces and Sagittarius are ruled by Jupiter, but one is more receptive, that, a water sign, a water temple for Jupiter, and one is the fire, which is action, and it's outward and it's expressive, and
Mhm.
it's almost like a shark. It needs the movement, otherwise it'll die out. And just going through the wand suits and the fire in general, like fire itself is a life form. I mean, like you have to, what is a life form? It's like it holds space, it consumes, it dies away, it needs an environment, it moves around. Like fire as life, like that's our spirit. And I completely 100% agree with you about, Sagittarius as being equally of like it should hold that badge of honor of being a quote spiritual sign just as much as Pisces. People give it to Pisces, but Pisces is way more passive and receptive in that, and Sagittarius is it's like the one that goes and seeks to get that experience. And people I know that have like sought um like organized religion and become clergy, or become, a traveling seeker, like have heavy Sagittarius placements. Like they're doing it, they're putting their faith or their beliefs or their values into an actionable thing. It's not just, I think about this in my own home and I'm comfortable in my own space, and then I'm practicing my spirituality at home, which is completely legitimate. It's like the action is required of of how you're living, as
Mhm.
opposed to just what you say you believe in.
Right. And there's, with both, I think, with both Sagittarius and Pisces, there's this willingness to be different and to be set apart. But I think, again, Pisces is accepting being set apart, and Sagittarius is like, I am here because of conditioning, and I will go there because of belief, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, there's
Mm-hmm.
this idea that, okay, I'm not in the right space, or we collectively are not in the right space, and there needs to be some sort of movement beyond the bounds of what is default.
Yeah.
And being willing to usher in that change personally.
Can I ask you a question and you can
Mm,
say, like, I don't want to answer it or whatever,
no,
but
please.
something that I've had conversations with many a Sagittarius, and like a thread that comes through is um, that they express, if someone has an idea of me, I instantly want to rebel against that idea. It's like, I don't like that people have an assumption that I should do or should be a certain way. And I associate that with just the freedom and wanting to kind of break free from any sort of constriction. But it
Mhm.
seems like I don't hear them express it from an internal way, but it's when it's externally placed upon them, they're like, nope, I used to like that, but now that you think I like that, I'm going to break away from that idea. So do you have that experience, or can you
Yeah.
explain what that might be?
Yeah, it's very much like a, well, now that you say it, I don't want it, and
Mm-hmm.
um, just this allergy to being pigeonholed, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think if we can allow Jupiter to represent some layers of like understanding, just the concept of understanding, and it's
Mm-hmm.
like, if you are too quick to put something under a label or under an idea, there's this idea that okay, this is the first or foremost lens that it will be viewed through. There's no capacity for understanding after that
Mm-hmm.
happens. Um,
Like
and
it
I think,
stops the process in a way.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. And I think I've experienced it in so many ways, right? Like I've been in so many contexts where just the way I physically show up will always be like a set series of filters that people will use to try to understand me before I've
Mm-hmm.
even opened my mouth.
Yeah.
And like, it never works. And I think because like it never works for them, like it's very confusing for me, right?
Yeah.
But I think after a certain point, there's like a little bit of devious cover I find in that.
Mm.
It's almost like now I wish to kind of play into that in certain aspects, right? Because it's like, oh, you're going to make this assumption and kind of
Yeah.
like make it my entire personality. Meanwhile, you don't know anything about me, and you know less and less when I give you more to assume on.
Yeah.
So I
Yeah.
might just, hand over a few little assumptions that people can make and then just like go off in my own direction, right?
Yeah.
I'm also a Scorpio sun, so that's there's a cover. There's like a
Yeah.
stealth that I'm learning to appreciate from it. But yeah, there's definitely this idea of like don't assume something like how dare you, right? How
Yeah.
dare you limit,
Yeah.
my expression in this world to like what patterns you've seen in your small life, right?
Hmm. Well, you use the word pigeonholed, and it's like that feels mercurial. It's like I am all of these things that it's
Hmm.
like an amorphous blob of all this stuff that is always changing, and this is always me. If you compartmentalize me as being this one thing that you relate to, like, you like tarot, and so in my mind, you will always just be tarot,
Hmm.
and that feels mercurial to like break it into little pieces of, you live near me, or you like this thing, or we
Hmm.
went to the same school, or you like this music. If if you're pigeonholing into this one very narrow thing, the idea of that, then if that's then the limitation, then that seems antithetical to what Jupiter wants. It's like, no, I am
Right,
all these things, i
right.
i am Krista. I'm not just X, Y, and Z. I'm not just this little
Right.
tiny thing.
Yeah, there's an aversion to similarity even, right? Like
Oh,
there's
interesting.
this is like, oh, I this idea of like putting distance between you and another, um, of like going elsewhere to experience more and more, right? Like this is the foreigner card. This is the
Huh.
long distance travel kind of idea of like Jupiter going further and further away and, putting themselves like Sagittarius will put themselves in situations where they're the only so that they can get a better idea of what else exists, but also so they
Interesting.
can
Yeah.
decide like what of the entirety of what exists in the world is something that I actually want to incorporate, not
Huh.
just what I had in my starting position, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So this like willingness and desire to go elsewhere to like gain more information about all of the different modes of being, right? And in that way, if there are people, ideas that are want to relate too closely. It's like, oh, you don't know what I've seen, and I want you
Mm.
to see more, and I want everyone to see more, right? Like
Hmm.
none of us should be satisfied with feeling over familiar.
Yeah.
Um,
Well,
and
does
I
that
think,
relate
yeah,
to the internal and external ride of the wheel that you talked about? Like, is that the integration then?
yeah, you know what? I think that is a very astute point. I think the external of like having the energy and capacity to like weather the bumps, even just like the idea of, okay, how many bumps are there in like very distant travel, right? You're in a
Hmm.
completely new context. Like you have to learn everything about
Yeah.
everything, right? There's nothing you can rely on. Versus like, okay, when you're still going on a path and you have to kind of close up a little bit and just say like, I'm here now and I'm going to learn where here is instead of
Mm.
like hop to the next place every
Hmm.
every 2 minutes because I don't have hop to the next place energy right now, right? Like,
Yeah.
it's like I don't have that stamina all the time,
Yeah.
even if I don't want to get off the ride.
Yeah.
And I do think that's again where this like wheel, there's an arrow, right? You're still going in one direction. It just how much you experience in each rotation is what
Hmm.
changes.
Yeah.
Um, and I do think that's like a very um, a nice part of the mutability of Sag is like, okay, the assessment of like, okay, I can't do it like this. I
Yeah.
wanted to, but I
Yeah.
can't. So like let's revise. You know.
So in how you read tarot, did you ever like work with like is it the Grand Cross that has the wheel and then like the side?
Mm,
Like that was like one
yeah.
that was always showed to me, and I was like, this doesn't make any sense to me. And then I met a woman who like turned it on its side, and there's
Mm,
like this, it's like a wheel shape, of cards, and then there's the pathway along, and you roll this way in order, like all these
Oh,
cards inform how you reach that pathway. And I was like, that makes way more sense, because when it
oh,
was
that's really
upright,
cool.
I was like, that's just arbitrary. I don't connect with it at all. And when she literally turned the table, I
Yeah,
was
yeah,
like,
yeah.
that. And when looking at the wheel and the direction that the arrow is pointing, it's like, here's your circumstance, here's your situation,
Hmm.
here's all your resources. These are the steps to get you out of here and onto something
Yeah.
new. So I was
Yeah, no,
curious.
yeah, so I don't normally do spreads like that.
Yeah.
I do tarot a lot more intuitively, but
Yeah.
so it's very rarely like a spread where there's an intention for each card to represent something else. But
Yeah.
I think that's really interesting. I would love to see more of
Yeah.
that. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, thank you so much. This was fun. I hoped it would be, and I'm
Yeah.
glad that it was. It's nice to meet you. And
Yeah.
since you're kind of inside the wheel now and your socials are closed for now, do you want to share anything with people just about who you are, or do you want
Yeah,
to just
sure.
wrap it up?
Yeah, I'm Olabimpe. I sometimes do tarot and astrology stuff. I might open my socials back again, and if I do, it's under it's under Ile Aworan, which is ILE_AWORAN, and it means the observatory in Yoruba.
I love that. Well, I'll put it in the show notes so that when you do open, it'll be clickable for people. Um,
Thanks.
but thank you so much for joining, and we'll stop the recording.
All right. Thank you.